my name is Jo. I'm the founder and CEO of Navistar Legal, and today I have Martine Robbins. Martine, hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Jo. How are you?
Good to see you. She is the director of the HR department, and she is here to talk a little bit about her experience, her starting out into the HR environment, working for herself, into business on her own, and then also a little bit about what people are going to be doing going forwards, how people are managing the crisis, what you've seen. So Martine, tell us a little bit about your background. Where have you come from?
Where have I come from? Okay. Well, I started up in the HR department 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years next week. So
Yes.
yeah, it seems in some ways a long time, in some ways hardly any time at all. Having come out of a corporate HR role and many roles actually for many years prior to that, and I'd done a mixture of HR senior roles, but found it was now the time to sort of do something different.
What was that mindset shift? What was the shift that took you from I'm working, I'm doing my job, I'm getting my salary to I think I'll set up on my own? What was the thing that triggered you to change?
I think it was getting to the point where, to be honest, it was not feeling able to deliver on the business strategy that had been agreed. So, and often that comes down to two things: personalities and politics. So
yeah.
I was encountering that increasingly, being sort of, the senior HR person in a business, and it was becoming a distraction. So for me, I thought about doing my own thing quite a few years previously to that, but it just didn't feel right. Whereas 4 years ago, I thought, well, let's do it now. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out. I go back into corporate life, but at least I've tried. But actually, it's opened up a whole new world of interesting HR opportunities. So I've really enjoyed making that transition.
Fabulous. Are there any, looking back, are there any things you wish you knew then that you know now, either that might have changed your decision or that just make you go, I just wish I'd known that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I've asked myself that question a few times. I think if I looked back, I probably would have made the jump sooner.
Interesting.
I think you do get to a point, and often when you get to that point, it's probably the negative reasons that are pushing you to do something else. And certainly that was the situation for me. And I wanted to get back to actually feeling that I was getting out of bed in the morning and doing something useful and using my skill and my knowledge and my experience to sort of deliver great HR, really.
And pull forward rather than push away.
Yeah. And so, making the transition from a corporate environment to working with SMEs, which is predominantly what I do now, been a great transition because, not least of all, I'm working with high energy, quick decision making individuals that are either senior in the business or running their own businesses. So from an HR point of view and also from a delivery point of view, it's great because we agree what needs to be delivered, it gets delivered, and we move on, and that's how we sort of work. And it's nice to be able to build up those close working relationships with clients as well. And up until recently, it's been on that journey with them as part of their business growth. At the moment, we're going back into business recovery, then it'll be back into growth. But I like being in that trusted advisor role, and I'm really able to do that quite closely and effectively, probably more than I thought I would, working with SMEs.
Tell me what you're seeing in the market at the moment with SMEs. What issues have been coming up over the last couple of weeks, and then what issues are you projecting going forward? Well, I say issues or opportunities, maybe yes. One or the other.
Yeah. Well, I think again, as we all know, out of adversity comes opportunity. So I have sort of seen businesses that are really struggling, and I've seen businesses that are flying despite being in a global pandemic, and I've seen everything in between. So I think it really depends on the business sector that you're operating in. Also, encouragingly, I'm actually seeing a lot of businesses thinking about pivoting and diversifying into new areas because now is presenting as good a time as any to try and do that. So that to me is quite exciting, and particularly I've got clients in the creative space, as I call it, that are doing that. So I think that sort of approach will actually hopefully stand them in good stead, because they're trying to do all the right things, and think about a different world as it relates to their business going forward. The last couple of weeks, we're sort of getting to changes in furlough that will probably be on the agenda, sort of a few days and weeks from the Chancellor. So we expect the furlough support to be reduced. And I think in addition to that, it's now seeing businesses that are starting to plan to go back to whatever will be their new normal. Construction are already starting to go back. Offices are starting to go back in some cases. So it's now throwing up different challenges, and also I think making businesses think about what they need to be doing going forward, which if it was different to 2 months ago, is giving them a lot of food for thought. So an example would be space. So a lot of businesses are now starting to think about, do they need the office space that they've got to embrace working from home perhaps more enthusiastically, more supportively to their employees? Could they have a mixture of both? Lots of different ways to cut it, but more importantly, it's giving businesses options, which I think is important.
Yeah, agreed. And it's difficult to know, isn't it? I guess it's all personal. I was speaking to a CEO yesterday who was expressing to me some of the difficulties with bringing people back to work. Like, is it, I mean, some of the questions, like, is it that he was having to ask his HR support, like, is it illegal for me to require people to be in the office now? The question. I don't know the answer. I don't think it is. Is it, what special things do we need to put in place? Does everybody have to wear a mask when they're in the office? Do we need things to separate? I mean, my thoughts on this are, all of those questions are ludicrous, but of course, I'm not the person who's, if it were my business and I had people going into the office, it would be a different conversation. So are you finding those sorts of conversations coming up?
Yes, I mean, very much so. I think businesses are looking at, obviously the nature of what they do, and obviously products, services, etc., the roles they have in their organisations. If you've got a production facility, for example, and they've managed to carry on throughout, what's happened so far, then that's just carried on regardless. But again, if you've got back office support, it's about how businesses can actually bring those businesses, to your point, back into the environment again safely, because obviously we're all thinking differently now about how we do our day-to-day activity, whether it's using public transport, whether it's going into an office, whether it's going into a shop. We're all going to be thinking differently. We're all going to be behaving differently. And I think the key thing is for business owners is to follow the health and safety guidelines that have been published, to do the COVID-19 support process in terms of the risk assessment. So, for example, I'm going into my office on Friday and I'm doing that. I already know with my landlord that they've gone through an extensive process, and basically they've already got people working back at the office environment where I'm based, but not everybody's in that space. But I think businesses are building up towards getting back to whatever was that previous normality. However, I think the challenge will be for business owners to stop and think about, okay, well, if I've got people working from home now, the productivity is there, maybe that's the best way to go forward.
Yeah, and I mean, we were just having a conversation before we pressed record about working from home and the differences there, and the benefits from a lifestyle perspective. I'm somebody that's worked from home for a number of years, and I'm actually doing more now online because I'm finding so many more people are open to being online rather than having to meet in person. So it's interesting that the shifts that are happening. I think a lot more people are interested now in having these conversations and knowing we don't always have to be, nobody has to be in London to have those conversations. You can be wherever you want, probably in the world, to do it, and that opens up a whole new world of opportunity.
Yeah.
So how are you how are you finding, or how did you find, when you transition from the corporate world to the SME world, how did you find your business skills changed and your ability to understand those businesses that you started working for?
Well, in terms of my approach, I'd always been told I was pretty tenacious and pretty much a strong influencer. I take that for all the right reasons, obviously, when I was in corporate environment. And so for me, it was sort of those skills, but obviously having to look at things through a different lens, really. When you're the sort of senior HR person in a business and you're sort of agreeing on an initiative, you're rolling it out, you've got the influence, you've got the responsibility, you've got the accountability, but typically you make those things happen in the way that you say you're going to do. Obviously, when you're transferring into a different environment and working with business owners, and yes, it's SMEs in this case, and running your own business, the interaction that you have with those business owners is different, because obviously it's not a case of going into that business owner and saying you need to do this, this, and this, okay, or else this is going to happen. It's about going in and still being able to influence, but it's about changing a different approach and using different tactics. It's more about being collaborative, I find, and being credible and showing that you do understand what that business owner has as challenges or as opportunities, what they're trying to achieve. And more importantly, you're able to show the value that you can bring, because for many SME businesses, they may not have worked with an HR consultant previously. They may have come out of corporate environment as well and had a bad experience, in which case you then have to work that little bit harder to show them that not everybody can be tarred with the same brush. So it's making sure that you're having that different approach, and even though you want to try and help those businesses, at the end of the day, all you can do is guide them and hopefully show them the value, and then they can make those decisions in terms of engaging you or not. And if they do engage you, then you can show that you can deliver on that, and you keep the relationship going from there. So for me, it was quite an interesting shift. I managed to sort of fall in line with that approach, I think, fairly quickly. I was conscious of having to work at it for a few months.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, there was a steep learning curve, actually. Even though I logically understood the SME corporate change, until you've experienced it, you can't really know it, can you? You can't really know it, because, and also every business is so different because each individual is so different. Yeah, I can really relate to that. Are there any personal things, values or beliefs that you've really held to be true, either during this time or just whilst you've been in business? Like any, can you impart some wisdom?
Oh, some wisdom. Okay. Well, I think it's important to have values, and I think obviously work either in a way, if you work as I do, I have my own business now, or work in an organisation that you can align those values, because I think when you have that sort of disconnect, then it can be problematic. So for me, the values that are really important to me are sort of behaving with integrity. That's always been really a strong value for me, and I've always looked for it in businesses that I've worked at. And I very much live and breathe that in my organisation now. And also I think it's about behaving with professionalism as well, and being authentic. People typically can see through when they're sort of being fed a load of bluster. So I think you have to be authentic in terms of how you engage with people, the ways you engage with people as well. And typically I think when you can show that, you tend to sort of get the right results. And likewise, I tend to look for clients that behave in the same way, because I think, again, when it's a meeting of minds, it's not as challenging, because you're all on the same page where the values are concerned. And then typically you build on that relationship, and you hopefully take it to something that becomes really mutually rewarding, as well as doing what it needs to do, which is helping them with their HR challenges and helping support their business growth. So I think integrity is probably the biggest one for me overall, though. Yeah, if I have a real bugbear around that.
Have you ever, because integrity, I would say, would be something that everybody would say, oh yeah, you know, working with integrity, but have you ever caught anybody out? I don't mean to name them, obviously, but have you ever experienced it where you thought somebody was values aligned and then that's kind of, you've gone, wait a minute, this isn't right. And just on that, so have you ever experienced that? And also, how do you check that somebody is values aligned before you start working with them?
Okay, well, I've certainly had the experience of where, you know, I'd felt that somebody that was certainly in a position of trust to me, that, you know, initially did have aligned values and behaved to obviously show that they weren't aligned, and you know, to all intents and purposes, if you like, let me down. And I think when you have that experience, it does make you question about, you know, how trusting you are of people. And sometimes that can make people sort of go the other way and be very mistrustful. I think for me, it just makes me a little bit more wary in terms of how people behave. And I'm very into behaviour in terms of understanding, you know, how people do behave and why they behave in the way that they do. So I use DISC, which is a sort of behavioural assessment tool. And I've used it for many years, and I've actually used lockdown to certify in it because I thought I've got, you know, training opportunity here. But I understand, you know, how I like to behave, but I also understand how others behave. So I can sort of quite intuitively now, if you like, assess people. So whether it's a client, whether it's, you know, a supplier, anybody, as soon as I start to engage with them, I can sort of, you know, understand where they are in the scheme of things, and more importantly, how they may or may not align to how I see the world. But the best way to try to interact with those people, to sort of get, if you like, a meeting of minds, because we are all different at the end of the day. But the idea is to sort of harness that and to work with it, rather than to sort of see it as, you know, a sign of someone being different to us or a sign of weakness, when it's not that at all. It's just the fact that we have to embrace those differences.
Yeah, so DISC is dominant,
influencing,
influence.
Yeah, steadiness and conscientious. So, and it's normally a good indicator of how we all like to behave. And it talks about, you know, our natural behaviour and also how we adapt our behaviour. You know, in times of stress, for example, you could argue now is an interesting time. You can see how people will adapt their behaviour, whether that is in a positive way or a negative way. So it's a good tool to sort of, you know, have that as in my armoury, shall we say. So I often find myself, because I've used it so long now, as a way of just understanding who I'm dealing with.
Right. How do you use that in the context of the work that you do? Do you go in and assess everybody and then they'll say, oh yeah, you're a D, you're an I, you're a high S, and map it out?
Well, you can use it in a number of scenarios. Obviously, people can use it as part of their own individual sort of training and development, and that's, again, always a good way to introduce people to it. But I've found now, whereas obviously I'm not, you know, managing a huge number of people directly anymore, how I tend to use it now is from a sales point of view. So when I, you know, meet people for the first time who potentially could be a client, I look to assess them in my own mind, shall we say, in terms of how they sort of fall onto that, you know, that DISC scale. So of course then it's about how I can engage with them to, if you like, show them what I'm about, and engage in the right way, to sort of get to hopefully moving them forward to becoming a client. So I do use it as part of the sales process for me now.
It's a way that works for them, I guess, isn't it? Because you can tailor your communication to make it work for the individual themselves, knowing their, I know it's not values based, but it's knowing their way of communicating and their way of being. Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, Martine, thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit about your journey, your SME story. Will you please give us how we can best get in contact with you? We will leave the details at the end of the video, but please just let us know what's the best way of getting in contact.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you just type in Martine Robbins, I will come up there. I like to think I'm the one and only, but you know, I'm the first one that comes up on there. So there's not too many of us around. So always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. So I tried to sort of put, you know, some regular information out on social media in terms of you know, what's going on in the HR world, as well as just, you know, points of information that might be of interest. Again, if people want to get in touch with me directly, they can do email, which is martine.robbins@hrdept.co.uk. Always happy to have a chat with people if they've got queries around an HR conundrum, whether it's a positive one or a negative one. It's not a problem to do that, because it's all about trying to signpost and hopefully help inform people in the ways of trying to manage their team and their organisations in the most effective way possible.
Fabulous. Thanks, Martine. And thank you, everybody who has joined and tuned in for Martine's SME story. For those of you that are interested in more SME stories and finding out more business support and information from people who've been there and done it, there is a subscribe button here. Otherwise, wishing you a lovely time. Do join us again for our SME stories. Good to see you.